Good evening and welcome back to our journey through the Bible. Tonight I have a new friend with me to help tell our next story. Her name is Medusa and she is a ball boa constrictor. Now God had finished creating his kingdom with Adam and Eve ruling over it for him. And remember that God had established a covenant relationship with Adam by the covenant of works, whereby God would test the love and commitment of Adam and Eve to him. Remember also that there was a hostile enemy to God's creation. God had created the angels, but some of them, led by a leader, rebelled against God and so became opposed to God and were evil. The leader of that rebellion is named Satan in the Bible. Apparently he wanted to get back at God and so decided to enlist God's kingdom rulers, Adam and Eve, into that rebellion. And since Adam was godly and in God's favor, Satan decided to tempt Adam indirectly. First, he used the form of a very crafty creature that was familiar to Adam and Eve, and then he tempted Eve first behind Adam's back. Satan knew Adam was to guard God's garden, and so he wouldn't expect a temptation from his own wife. Well, Satan approached Eve first by questioning God's command and did it in such a way as to make the command seem oppressive. Eve passed that first test, yet she added to the severity of God's command, "Nor shall you touch it, lest you die." Well, Satan knew that he'd gained a hold on Eve's heart, so he boldly challenged the truth of God's word. He said, "You shall surely not die." And then he sweetened the temptation to disobey God with a beguiling benefit, "You'll be like God." This is Satan's tactic. He causes us to doubt God's goodness. He then challenges God's word and adds a selfish pleasure to be gained by disobeying God. It worked. Eve saw the act of disobedience in a self-pleasing way and sinned. Eve then tempted her husband Adam, and he listened to her rather than listening to God. The pleasure of being independent of God lasted only a moment. The effect lasted a lifetime, even down to our day. Adam and Eve's relationship was broken. They had hid themselves from one another and their hearts from each other, and their relationship with God was broken, and they hid from God. Satan had done his dirty work. He forever earned another name, the serpent of old. But God had a plan. He knew what Adam and Eve would do. He would still be glorified even in their disobedience, and his grace would be displayed through their sin. How? Well, God, as he always does, came looking for Adam and Eve. They, like we, didn't look for him. God first asked Adam what he had done. And you know what Adam did? Well, he blamed Eve, and then he blamed God for giving him that woman. God asked Eve, and she blamed the serpent. And so as Adam and Eve's children, we refuse to own our own sin, and we blame somebody else. God, who knows everything, knew what had happened, and he judged the serpent, Satan. And so our friend here bears the mark of God's judgment and crawls on its belly for all time. The amazing thing is that in the judgment against Satan, God gave a promise. And this is the first revelation of his redemptive grace. God put an enmity or hatred between the serpent and the woman and their descendants. The alliance Satan tried to forge was disrupted. And God promised that the woman's seed, a son, would one day come and crush the serpent's head, though the serpent would severely wound him. And that seed, the promised son, would be Jesus, and he would save his people from their sins. This promise is the beginning of God's covenant of grace. It was made with Jesus, God's Son. Adam and Eve, though judged for their sin, hardship, and death in this life, believed God's promise. God clothed them with skins of animals sacrificed for them, teaching them and us the need for a substitutionary sacrifice and clothing by another, a picture of being clothed with the righteousness of Jesus. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, God had grace toward Adam and Eve, but the relationship with God was broken by sin, and they were cast out of God's presence, the garden, and the tree of life. They would have to live solely by faith, the hard way, in a world corrupted by sin. However, they had God's promise. That's good news. Good night.